The Nintendo 3DS is finally preparing to enjoy a well-earned retirement. It's been a success for Nintendo in spite of a clumsy launch, general apathy towards the stereoscopic 3D feature, and numerous hardware revisions being branded in the most confusing ways possible. But for all the fun that we've had over the years street passing, objectioning, building armies, returning to SR388, and catching them all, most of the gaming world has been eager for Nintendo to focus on the Switch and say goodbye to what could be the company's last dedicated portable platform. Whether you're ready to move on from the 3DS or sad to see it go, this is a major part of gaming history. The nostalgia will eventually come, and many excellent games will be locked to this platform, which they may never be ported from. Even as the 3DS heads into the sunset, it's important to continue to share our experiences through streaming, videos, and other media so that these games can be referenced, researched, and not forgotten. Or maybe you're just looking for a way to play these games on the big screen. And just how do we do that? Well, that's the problem.
2011. Wow, can you believe it was really that long ago already? I don't think it was that popular, but for my money, Pilotwings Resort is an excellent continuation of the series. What an unexpected but fitting game to launch a Nintendo system with. I know I certainly savored its first appearance in 15 years. I mean, sure, Woohoo Island is no little states, but it's a clever setting for the game nonetheless. They hadn't quite dialed in that 3D effect yet, though. It was crazy overpowered in Pilotwings. I had to pull it back to about halfway, even though I was otherwise all about max depth 3D. But of course, we're not really here to talk about that, and to be fair, most people probably aren't interested in sharing the 3D experience anyway, but there are a number of ways you can get 3DS games on your TV or computer monitor and capture gameplay. Sort of. The sad thing is, that ship has kind of sailed for now. Hardware-based methods are no longer easily obtainable, software-based methods result in heavy compression, and 3DS emulation, while impressive, struggles to run at full speed at this stage of development. So this is a different sort of video from us. I wish we could say we were able to show you great ideas that you can go and try for yourself right now, but the reality is that at this moment, the 3DS is in kind of a bad place. And even when options were more readily available, the experience was never really perfected. So we're going to take a look at some of what has been and think about what could be done better. Nintendo has kept anyone with official 3DS video output and capture hardware on a tight leash. The devices are owned by Nintendo and are lent out only to developers and members of the press. And if they ever do end up circulating among the public, you can expect them to be extremely pricey, like the Nitro development units for the original DS. Unfortunately, no one to our knowledge has ever distributed anything like a straight-up HDMI or DVI output mod for the DS or 3DS. While that might sound like the ideal and obvious thing to do, you'd have to consider whether to present two screens with one output, and there are surely other technical hurdles. Instead, 3DS output boards have been designed and marketed primarily as capture kits with USB interfaces. These devices are designed for use with custom software that serves as a viewing interface. These mods cannot be recognized by other software like OBS as a capture device, so to stream, you have to do desktop capture of the viewer window itself. A serviceable but less than ideal sort of setup. However, most footage in this episode was recorded using this type of hardware in a bit of a different way, which we'll take a much closer look at in a few minutes. Currently, a more accessible means of projecting the screens to another device is to use new Nintendo 3DS systems equipped with custom firmware, which can stream images over local Wi-Fi to be received by client software on a computer. Similar to Capture Kit viewing software, this can then be screen captured for streaming or recording. Our buddy the 8-Bit Duke captured all of this material using Qt NTR. He tells us that he finds the process to be pretty fiddly overall and that picture quality and performance are highly dependent on available bandwidth. Frames will be dropped and the visual results are pretty obviously compressed in places where there's a lot of detail and motion. Looking at the PC screen, he says that lag feels similar to as if you were to play through a capture card window. Nonetheless, for many streamers, these results could get the job done, although streaming would strain your network resources even further. We understand that there is also a screen streaming method for old 3DS systems, but it is apparently not suitable for this sort of application. The open source Citra emulator for 64-bit operating systems is the only major software emulation option for 3DS games that we're aware of. Keep in mind that we aren't the most knowledgeable when it comes to setting up emulation on PCs, but the Citra user experience is pleasantly straightforward. Controls are easy to set up, screen view modes work well, and none of the settings seem terribly obtuse. However, optimizing performance has clearly been a huge challenge for the developers. Expect the general performance to run slower than the intended system speed, along with jumpy frame rates and momentary pauses. Here's an example of how the Citra Nightly build is currently performing for us on a Windows PC running with a 1950X AMD Threadripper and a GTX 1080 Ti.
Let's go!
Performance varies depending on the scene. Notice that the timer in Pilotwings Resort is running nowhere near full speed when most of the island is in full view, but becomes much more accurate when closer up. Citra's higher resolution visuals are actually rather flattering to the texture and effects work in many games, which shows that proper HD ports of 3DS games to Switch would work great if Nintendo were to choose to do so. While for our own purposes we prefer to represent games with the processing capabilities of the original hardware, Citra will no doubt play a major role in the 3DS's overall preservation, and it'll be interesting to see if options such as 3D viewing through VR could become more viable in the future as computer hardware becomes more powerful and the emulator is further optimized. There's a fairly honest assessment of where compatibility is at on the Citra website. Some games certainly run a lot better than others, although needless to say, everyone's experience will vary depending on system resources. In the world of official emulation, the Wii U offers a selection of 31 original DS titles on Virtual Console. These look pretty great, and the gamepad is a perfect tool for translating these games to a console environment, although input lag in these versions could be concerning for some players. Even though the Nintendo Switch has a capacitive touchscreen itself, its inability to be used simultaneously with a television while in handheld mode makes dual-screen official emulation for 3DS games a bit less likely.
Just because a console is older doesn't mean its time is past. The retro tech scene is lively and always evolving, and has produced miraculous developments to improve the video output from the NES, on up to the Dreamcast and GameCube. The Game Boy Advance has achieved perhaps its ultimate form thanks to the long-awaited Woozle GBA Consolizer mod, complete with HDMI video output and an SNES controller port. If RGB and VGA output mods have been developed for even the Virtual Boy, then we have to hold on to hope that the DS and 3DS will one day receive at least as much care and attention. As far as existing hardware solutions go, 3DS capture kits have only ever been produced by two sources as far as we know, the Japan-based Katsukitty and a US-based designer who goes by Loopy. While Katsukitty created boards for installation inside seemingly every possible model of 3DS, to date, Loopy has only ever produced boards for installation inside original Model 3DS systems. Unfortunately, Katsukitty is now out of business, and it seems to be unclear at the moment whether Loopy intends to manufacture any additional 3DS kits, or pursue development on any hardware for later models. We chatted a bit via email with Marc, a European distributor for both Katsukitty and Loopy kits, and he tells us that he is also getting out of the game once his existing stock is depleted. He seems to believe that his business can no longer count on receiving a return on investment for additional 3DS hardware, which is understandable, but doesn't change the fact that we love to see fresh ideas from the community to perfect 3DS audio-video output. From what we've gathered, Loopy seems to have earned a better reputation among streamers and other content creators compared to Katsukitty, citing more reliable hardware, lower prices, and better customer service. The only problem was, you could order at nearly any time from Katsukitty's site, while Loopy's availability seems to have been hit or miss. While we don't have a Loopy 3DS kit, we do have experience with an original DS capture kit installed by Loopy. Like the 3DS kits, this is also a USB interface that can be viewed only by using Loopy's software. One nice perk here is that you can also capture Game Boy Advance games with this. But we found the connection to be inconsistent, the viewer window to be noticeably laggy, and we also experienced some frame rate issues. But it wouldn't be fair to assume that the Loopy 3DS experience is the same without testing. Like Loopy's 3DS kits, the DS kit could only be installed in the original model. When we were shooting a documentary at a game studio near Tokyo in June of 2018, we took advantage of the opportunity to bring Try's new 3DS XL to Katsukitty's shop in Akihabara, since we felt we'd need the ability to record 3DS games for the show. This was way more affordable compared to dealing with international shipping, and we were able to get the system back within a few hours. Little did we know that months later, Katsukitty would be closed, and their internet presence virtually wiped from existence. It's very possible that this has something to do with a new law in Japan that prohibits profiting from services such as console modification. But even without that, Katsukitty may not have been able to keep a business running on 3DS capture demand for much longer anyway. They also had Vita capture mods, and even offered Nintendo Switch capture, which Digital Foundry uses for Switch handheld mode analysis, and it works quite nice for them. But uses for that kind of functionality is pretty niche. Most people with Katsukitty or Loopy 3DS kits use each provider's software to view the game window, while Loopy's software can record AVI files and Katsukitty's is strictly a viewer. Both can be screen captured to record or stream however you wish with software like OBS. Looking at Katsukitty's software, there appears to be a lot of options at a glance, some of which are a bit obtuse. Side-by-side 3D viewing is designed for VR headsets. Old-school red-blue anaglyph 3D is also supported, but it's certainly not the most pleasant thing to look at. Our biggest disappointment with the Katsukitty viewing software is that there doesn't seem to be a way to get a clean integer scale on the 3DS's top screen in full screen mode, even on a 4K screen, which can look quite uneven, especially in pixel art games. Integer scale appears to only go up to 3x in windowed mode, which doesn't make for ideal viewing. However, the essential elements of this software were streamlined into another form with some improvements, which makes for a much better experience.
Now, I have to admit, as much as I really do love the 3DS's 3D feature, I've always preferred to play games on a bigger screen. So stuff like the Super Game Boy and the video output from PSP has always been really appealing. And I think the reason I waited so long to get any sort of 3DS mod was because the devices that were offered were first and foremost about capture, but what I wanted was that big screen experience, and yeah, I could just play them on my PC full screen, but the idea of that never really sat right with me. But then just before we went to Japan, I noticed that Katsukitty had begun to offer something that appealed exactly to my way of thinking. This is Katsukitty's TV kit for serving as an interface to connect new Nintendo 3DS systems equipped with their capture board via USB, and outputting as HDMI to your TV, or capture card via HDMI just like you do for all your other systems. But okay, yes, let's not kid ourselves, and some of you have probably already sustained facepalm injuries. It's just a Raspberry Pi. And sure, I know, Katsukitty charged more than a pre-configured Raspberry Pi should be worth, although I paid a lot less in person than I was expecting based on the website. But it's such a cool concept, something tailored exactly to my sensibilities, to get that proper big screen experience with handheld games, integrating it into my AV setup rather than viewing through my PC. Even if I was a bit skeptical, I had to give this idea a chance, and hey, if nothing else, it would be interesting for a video. And to be clear, for whatever reason, the TV kit was only ever designed to work with Katsukitty's new Nintendo 3DS capture boards, so unfortunately, owners of Katsukitty's earlier 3DS kits cannot use this functionality. I later discovered that the Raspberry Pi software is still available in the info section of the European Mercy website as of the time of this video if you have the means to use it. Raspberry Pi identifies the maximum supported resolution of the connected display devices up to 1080p. By using the buttons on the TV kit, you can navigate a menu that thankfully offers essential options like nearest neighbor integer scaling. The dot by dot setting ensures that pixel sizing is a consistent integer scale regardless of the connected screen's resolution and other settings. Since the 3DS screens are only 240 pixels tall each, yep, that's right, the 3DS is 240p, the image will be a 4x integer scale on 1080p capable TVs when displaying only the top screen, which does leave some black space, but them pixels are just like I like them. This easily beats the 3x integer scale of the viewer software or the uneven full screen sizing, and all around just makes for a nearly ideal 3DS scaling situation by my standards. If you prefer your pixels a bit more filtered, you can choose the bilinear option, and then you don't necessarily have to use the dot by dot to constrain the screen sizing to clean integer scales. And there are, of course, options to display the bottom screen alongside the top screen. 50/50 sizing works best for this in my opinion, and while it does make the overall image quite small, a few games do have the main action occur on the bottom screen rather than the top screen. You can even rotate the screens, which is a nice idea, but does not gain you anything in terms of picture size when using dot by dot mode. However, displaying both screens locks the frame rate on the TV kit to 30, which is not a great situation for 60 FPS games. This seems to be a limitation of the Raspberry Pi rather than the output hardware installed in the 3DS, since the PC viewing software behaves normally with dual screens. One oversight then is that there is no bottom screen only view mode on the TV kit, which would be nice for a lot of original DS games. As you may know, you can boot DS games with 1:1 pixel sizing by holding Start while launching from the 3DS dashboard into DS mode, avoiding the 3DS's rather blurry internal scaling. Through the TV kit, this does cause DS games to have a ton of empty space above the image, so it's too bad there are no DS-specific sizing options. Since I was looking at the TV kit as a potential way to not only capture 3DS games, but also easily enjoy them on my TV, input lag is certainly a consideration here. The bad news is that it's far from ideal, but it could certainly be a lot worse. My test suggests that the TV kit is giving about 3 frames of lag over the response seen on the 3DS screen, which is of course in addition to whatever lag your TV or monitor may inherently have. 3 frames is about 48 milliseconds, so in the case of 30 frames per second games, of which the 3DS has a ton of, that's about a frame and a half. Many people would consider this ruinous to gameplay, but I've certainly dealt with worse, and it's barely a problem for the system's large selection of RPGs. Interestingly, you can lock to 30 frames per second through the menu if you wish, but it seems like this option may increase lag by up to 16 milliseconds. And it's worth noting that the 3 frames of lag is identical to my results using the Katsukitty 3DS viewer software through my PC. I would be curious how the Loopy software compares. The video output is also not entirely smooth. Every 5 to 6 seconds, a series of duplicate frames causes a spot of juddery motion, presumably due to the even 60Hz output of the Raspberry Pi's HDMI not matching to the particular refresh rate that actual 3DS screens use. Similar refresh mismatch hitches occur when using Super Game Boy or even Super Game Boy 2 through a Super Nintendo due to the different speeds of each platform, so this is certainly not a new problem when it comes to playing handheld games on a TV. Working around these issues requires a bit of extra engineering. For instance, the default installation configuration for the GBA consolizer overclocks the system by just a fraction of a percentage so that the system's frame output timing matches the 60Hz of the HDMI connection to achieve zero stuttering. Once again, the PC viewing software exhibits the same behavior, so at least the Raspberry Pi is not a downgrade in this regard. To be fair, many people may not even notice the duplicate frames, and in all likelihood most stutters will go unnoticed depending on what type of motion is occurring in the game at that moment. It's also much less likely to be spotted in 30 frames per second games, but all the same, working around this issue is something that should be taken into consideration for any future DS or 3DS output hardware. The biggest problem with the Katsukitty product is sound capture, which is nearly useless in both the viewer software and the TV kit, and well, since Katsukity is gone, it will probably always have that little beta symbol next to it. Naturally, this feature sends digital audio over HDMI, but it very quickly drifts out of sync with the visuals. Way out of sync. The only workaround, which I believe is what they intended people to do, seems to be using audio output from the 3DS's built-in headphone jack, which presents another problem. Plugging the USB capture cable into the 3DS causes the headphone jack to be a bit noisy. I can't hear it when using actual headphones, but any other output cable I've tried has some sort of unpleasant high-pitched noise when the USB is in use. I was able to minimize the issue by using a higher quality power supply with the Raspberry Pi, along with the highest quality analog audio cables I could dig up, and doing some adjustments through my mixer so I could capture audio. I can't really hear it when there's prominent music, but at other times, like in the system menu, it's still annoying. Mind you, I'm a total EQ amateur, but this was the best I could do. Now, please understand, I have no programming knowledge or any experience setting up Raspberry Pis, so for all I know, it could be easier than I think to force the TV kit output to match the 3DS's refresh rate, or even fix the digital audio behavior, or maybe not. But if anyone does think it's possible to remedy the few sticking points in what is otherwise a pretty nice setup, well, do let us know.
So between the lag, refresh mismatch, and the audio capture issues, Katsukity is far from a be-all, end-all for 3DS capture in TV viewing products, but at least it looks really good through the TV kit. It's a nice enough solution for now. One day, we hope that the DS and 3DS can achieve their ultimate forms: low latency and judder-free TV play, perhaps even 3D support for VR headsets. Maybe the Wii U gamepad or generic tablets could be utilized in some fashion, and dare we even hope for direct video output without USB interfaces? We're not there yet. Who knows if we'll even get there before the 3DS and 2DS systems are off store shelves. But we have confidence that the community will one day push the hardware beyond its current means so that we can enjoy these games in new ways, and that more people can share 3DS video content in the best quality possible.